I never thought I'd be here, and I didn't want to be. And see, I always thought I would be first, and that's why I agreed with him. But all right, here we go. I was one of the guys who wrote for Jim, and I went on the state fair circuit with him. And late one night, 8 years ago, in a room at the Ramada Inn in Springfield, Illinois, Jim made me swear that whichever one of us was still standing, the survivor, would publicly, at the other one's funeral, confess that together, Jim and I, on movie sets, out on location, plotted the murders of several caterers. It was us. It was us. There were 3 days in my life that they were all Jim. You understand? I said, we went on the state fair circuit together. It was he and I wrote a little thing. Phil Walden called up and said, "Hey, Butler, got to go to the state fair. They love Ernest out there." And so, sure, Phil. Did Buster say it was okay? Yeah. Yeah, man, yeah. So Jim and I went to the state fair. I just want to give you snapshots of one day on the road with Jim Varney at a state fair, all right? Number one, you're on the airplane and the stewardess says, "No, you can't be that Ernest guy. He's real stupid." And Jim, I saw 20 different comebacks going through Jim's face, and he finally just said, "Yeah, you're right." And then we get to the airport in Minneapolis. We get off, and a 60-year-old African-American shoe-shine guy screams out from across the airport, "Ernest, my man, get over here!" Now, Jim looked more un-earnest than I had ever seen him look. He had an earring, he had a long suede coat, an Armani suit, and this guy recognized him and had to talk to Jim and get his autograph. And we just to the airport, right? Now we're in a parade in Minneapolis, St. Paul. There's 40 guys in fezzes driving little Jeepsters real recklessly in front of us. And Jim's sitting up on the back of this convertible, and I'm sitting down front. And a woman breaks through the barricade and runs up to the car with a baby outstretched and says, "Ernest, kiss my baby." And Jim just looks down at me. He takes the baby, looks down at me, and said, "I'm kissing her baby." What a wonderful way of telling her how much I love her. And we ain't halfway through the day yet, And then another woman ran up and said, Ernest, I'm 42 and I'm just divorced. Will you marry me?" "I'm not having her baby." Speed up, and we drove off. But now we're sitting backstage, and you got to understand, we're on the Speedway on this big stage, where Alabama plays at night at the Minnesota State Fair. And the act that was opening for us were the Ninja Turtles. Now, the Ninja Turtles were, in reality, 4 gay dancers from New York. So now visualize, if you will, Ernest and me sitting backstage at a state fair with the 4 Ninja Turtles with their heads off under their arms. And Michelangelo is having an argument with Donatello. With something like this. "Donatello, you know you owe me that money, damn it. Give me the money." And Jim, and we're hearing this, and this gets real tense, and Jim looks at me, and all of a sudden in this shrill voice says, "Derek, you're just like Donatello." Who is Derek? And he's looking at me, "You borrowed that money from you. You and Donatello are bad. You're poison." These 4 gay dancers from New York were hearing this voice come out of Ernest P. Worrell. Just stunned them, and they got up and went out on stage. And it stunned me, too. We got out there, Phil will tell you, it was a 45-minute show, and we did it in 20 minutes. And, but we after the show, Jim sits there, and he signs probably 600 autographs. And takes like 600 photos for the family scrapbook. And it was amazing. I was just whoa out. And we go back to this Ramada Inn, and my phone rings in my room, and it's Jim, and he's had about 2 pounds of chocolate and some coffee, and he wants to work on his sequel to Hamlet. Now, first thing I said to Jim was, Jim, Hamlet, everybody died, buddy. You know, I said, no, Mr. Butler. There was an antidote. And I mean, in that Ramadian room, this guy had written the most beautiful soliloquies and did them. And it was unbelievable. And it went on all night. And then there was a day in my life, I don't know about you, but if you can remember one day in your life where you laughed more than any other day in your life, and I can tell you to the minute, sitting in the conference room at Cardin and Cherry with Buster and Jim. And here's the deal, as a writer for Ernest, you were supposed to write funny things. And as Buster let the cat out of the bag, none of them were, but Jim made them funny. But we realized after a while that even though Jim would not write things down, that he was so funny, what we would do is let him ad-lib, and I would just write them down. See, this was my way of being an earnest writer. And so before the movie, I think it was Scared Stupid, you know, Buster says, well, Jim's coming over today, and just take down everything he says. Okay, Buster. So we get in there, and somehow Botswana came up, you know, as it will in conversation. And Jim, he went off, you know, he went off. And the next thing I knew, Jim was the only lumberjack in Botswana. And we were just laughing till we cried, and he was just going off. And now, after 45 minutes, you think, Botswana's going to get a little old, right? And I went to the restroom, and I came back, and I said, all right, I'm not going to laugh anymore. You know, I got work to do. And I went back in there, and he said, man, there ain't no trees in Botswana. I should know, I'm the only lumberjack in Botswana, and I haven't worked in 32 years. And then he starts off on the popsicle. We don't have the little wooden sticks for the popsicles. We have little steel rods. Because there ain't no trees, and the children's tongues adhere to the little steel rods because they're so cold. And God, my head hurt. It went off for 5 hours. I mean, Buster and I, we never laughed, and I didn't get half of it down because I was laughing so hard. One day, Jim and I were having lunch with 23 midgets. And he taught me how to say "arrêt" without closing my mouth. He taught me all sorts of stuff. But I tell you, the one day that came back to me, and that was about 16 years ago, and I got to sit in on maybe 2 earnest writing sessions. I was the junior member of Glenn Slazier and Gill. And I'd been in like 2 sessions, and I hadn't written squat. I had contributed one phrase that I stole from my father-in-law in Oklahoma, which was, golly, Bob howdy. And I stole that. And I met Jim one time on the Ernest set. So, but I had greatly embellished my role to my family and my in-laws. There was probably 1 degree of separation, Ernest separation, buddy. I was big time, I was a writer for Ernest. Well, 2 weeks later, we go out to Oklahoma City to visit my mother and father-in-law with the new baby. And J.T. Dowdy, who always said, golly, Bob howdy to me whenever he asked, when I told him something, how much I had paid for something. Golly, Bob howdy. And there he was. And he said, well, I want you to introduce me to your old buddy Ernest. And I said, oh, no problem. Next time you come to Nashville, well, I'll introduce you. He said, no. 2 hours, he's going to be down here at Brahms doing a personal appearance. I just said, really? Right here in Oklahoma City. I didn't know he was coming to town. And man, I'm sweating bullets for 2 hours. Thinking, gosh, man, he ain't going to know me. He didn't even know who I was when I met him on the set. And, oh man, I was dying, but he's going to come on. And we get in the car, and I take Max, and we go down there, and there's 500 people at this Brahms. The line's going all the way out in the street. And I said, oh, it's too crowded. You know, I'll get you autographs back in Nashville, because I knew Lynn Johnston would sign them. He said, no, I'm meeting Ernest, buddy. Come on, he'll know, he'll recognize you. We'll get through this line in no time. And I just said, oh, he might not. huh? And we get in that line, and we're way back in the back, and Lynn Johnston sees me, and Jim sees me, and she whispers in Jim's ear. And back at the back of this line of 500 people, Jim gets up and goes, Mr. Butler, what are you doing in Oklahoma City? Get your butt up here. And he brings me up there with my son and my father-in-law. And I said, hey, man, this is J.T. Dowdy, the guy that said, golly, Bob, howdy. And Jim made him feel like he said, man, that's my favorite phrase. And Ernest is always going to say that. You're the guy. And my father-in-law just glowed when he talked about that day till the day he died. And Jim saved my ass that day. And he didn't just save my ass, but he made me think I was something special. Next thing I knew, he was telling my father-in-law, this is 1984. Oh, yeah, Butler here's going to write movies for Disney. We're going to be big Hollywood stars. And my father-in-law thought I was bummed, but not after that day. And I saw Jim do that, make people feel special. It didn't matter if they were a plumber or a truck driver, a purity driver. He had that ability, man, to make you think you were something. Everybody around him. And he made me laugh more than any other person my whole life. And I was the one supposed to be writing funny stuff for him. And I know God prepared a room for Jim, and I'll bet you it's got a really fine area.
Jimmy, everybody that shared before we got up here,